Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to turn to author, broadcaster, and microbiologist Jason Tetro. Jason, welcome to the Kaiser Report.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Jason, many will ask, what is a microbiologist doing on Kaiser Report? But you are here to tell us about what germs can teach us about today's economic environment. So tell us a little bit about where this is going, Jason.
When I wrote my book, The Germ Code, a few years ago, one of the things that I was trying to do was find a way that we can improve the relationship with germs. And part of that actually would be to personify germs, give them sort of a personality, if you will. And as I went further into depth into how microbes work from a human perspective, I realized the microbes seem to work almost in the same way as humans when it comes to the economy. We call it the biological or microbiological market, but really it's exactly the same as some of the things that we're seeing today, whether it be Wall Street, the 1% versus the 99%, and recessions, crashes, all of that. You see that in the microbial world. It just happens more often, and we could probably learn a lot from it.
All right, it sounds almost to bring in yet another science, the science of mathematics. It sounds like the relationship is one, you could call it fractal in nature, that these germs are acting as a subset of behavior amongst humans in a way that appears to be identical, but on a much smaller scale. Your thoughts?
Well, in a way that is true. We call it stochastic, actually. But what you can do is, if you, say, look at an E. coli bacterium, and you look at a colony, it acts exactly like you would see a city. You actually see suburbs where these the microbes are actually creating little subdivisions where they're all growing together. You have urban centers where you have some of the most rich and then also some of the most poor. And it's funny because the rich are always stealing from the poor. It's just like what we see today. And then you have the rural areas where they're actually trying to, grow outside of the colony to see whether or not it's worth, expanding out there. It's exactly how humans did civilization, and that's just one bacterium in one colony. The difference is that humans, they multiply about once every 20 years, whereas these bacteria, they do it once every 20 minutes. So while it may be stochastic and mathematical in nature, what we can learn from it is how we can perceive society and how we can actually strive to improve society over time.
Now, Jason, when you describe studying bacteria, of course, in microbiology, there are many ways to do this, advanced equipment, you have ways to track these colonies, etc. Up until recently, you wouldn't really have that ability in terms of studying human beings. But in the last few years, with the adoption of social media, with the adoption of all of these other technologies, suddenly what they call big data, for all of our inputs, all of our traffic on the web, all of our credit card transactions, everywhere we go with geolocation, etc. We are becoming exactly ability to study humans in the same way. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, absolutely. Big data is absolutely huge in the scientific world, and as we're growing more and more, we're beginning to see how big data can actually give us a perspective as to where our society is and where it's going. And something as simple as consumer purchases. We now have loyalty cards where you can not only track what berry that person is going to like at the grocery store, but if that berry happens to be contaminated, we can actually trace back using loyalty cards to find out whether or not that person got sick. Actually, we're at a point now where we're even looking at outbreaks using Yelp as a means instead of the CDC. So big data has a huge perspective, not only in my world, but pretty much in every other world. And the more that we accumulate in terms of data, the more we're going to learn and understand. The problem, and the key critical problem, is in a microbial sense, we gather data and no one really gets hurt from it. But in a human sense, if you start gathering data and then you start putting together all of these ideas, you might want to try and change society, or at least take advantage of society for your own gains, and unfortunately leave others behind.
Well, what about the example of Facebook? They were recently busted for feeding people's news streams in ways that would affect their emotions to make them happy or sad. Isn't that exactly what you're saying?
That's exactly true. And we have a type of infection that actually happens called Toxoplasma gondii. And what it does is it actually produces a whole number of different messages that get sent to the brain, which actually cause you to be depressed and even suicidal. So while Facebook and Toxoplasma gondii have those links, we've known this about Toxo for years, and I don't understand why Facebook wouldn't have figured this out, that if you start sending negative messages to the brains of individuals, that, surprise, surprise, they're going to have a negative reaction in return.
Okay, and this study on Facebook is backed, financially anyway, from the U.S. military, so that would be a worrying trend, correct, Jason?
Well, I think that when it comes to trying to find ways to make changes, especially in warfare, the first public that are always tested happen to be the ones that are on your home soil. So it doesn't surprise me that the American government would be answering something like this, because it could help to develop, further Arab Springs in the future in other areas. Unfortunately, if you don't follow a proper ethical guideline so that people don't actually get the fact that they're being played with, you don't need a microbe to sign an informed consent form. You need humans to do that. Otherwise, you're extremely unethical. So yes, I'm not surprised, but by the same respect, in today's world, it's definitely uncalled for. All
right, now, Jason, you mentioned loyalty cards a moment ago and how that collects data that goes into the big data calculations, and all this data is tracked. Now, we know, and I've talked about it on the show before, that in the casino industry, they collect data, they use loyalty cards to adjust the winning percentages on slot machines, or they'll adjust the temperature in the casino, or they will adjust the scent that they're pumping into the casino because they know that it's very psychoactive and gets people to behave in different ways. Hasn't the casino industry been a leader in this science, if you will, of manipulation of the population, as you're describing it in the microbial world, applied to humans? Is that true, what I just said about the casino industry? Because it's something I've been talking about for a while. What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. There is a particular bacterium known as Clostridium difficile. It's made lots of headlines because it is a rather nasty disease. And what it does is actually manipulates the entire gastrointestinal system so that your body actually goes downhill in health, but it continues to grow because it takes in all these nutrients and then it stores them in these spores. So what it does essentially is it's producing all of these signals, these toxins and other chemicals that essentially make the body want to try and put more nutrients into the gut. Unfortunately, what that does is it ends up hurting you in the process. Your health goes down, your economic health, if you will, goes downhill. And then eventually, if it's not treated, if it's not, taken away, or if you happen to live in Las Vegas, get out of town, then you actually end up dying from the disease. So that manipulation is actually very common in our microbiological world, and it can be long-term, like I just talked about with C. difficile, or for someone who is simply going to Vegas for 48 hours, it can be short-term. And something like that could be as simple as having a very nasty flu. It's the exact same thing. Your body is being coerced, manipulated into doing things it doesn't want to do, but then it'll eventually disappear over time when your body finally figures it out. Hopefully, you can do the same when you're being manipulated in a social environment.
This does apply to economics, and economics is run on confidence. And, for example, a very subtle form of this type of manipulation in the UK is when the government speaks about people need to get on the property ladder, as if the property ladder only goes up. They don't tell people that it's a game of chutes and ladders, where sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. So isn't this a way to get people to act irrationally against their own interest? I think I've answered my own question. So let me move on to my next question, which is...
If I may just simply say something, much like I talked about with subdivisions within the E. coli colony, we have the structure called a biofilm, which is really property. And it's neat because when you look at it over time, you actually think that a biofilm only grows bigger and bigger and becomes richer and richer. But actually what happens is you have ups and downs, sinusoidal waves of economic growth and wealth. And in some cases, what happens is that you start seeing the wealthier ones actually having the best biofilms, where the ones that are less able to, to cope or to survive with the economics around them, they end up having to go away into much less structured environments, and sometimes they're just left to go out into the wastes. So what you're saying is absolutely true. The property ladder is not possible in a microbial world, and it's definitely not showing it in the economic.
So, Jason, what you're describing here, it sounds like the field of microbiology has undergone a remarkable increase in data and in scientific exploration. We hear that because of the advances in computer technology that human intelligence, human knowledge has doubled every 7 years or something like that. You're on the front line of a specific field of science, microbiology. It sounds, just based on this short conversation, but it sounds like your field has exploded in terms of the data and knowledge and things that are going on. Is that true?
Yeah, and there's only one word to explain why. It's called microbiome. And essentially, what happened is that when researchers realized that when you look in the mirror, you see 100% human. We look in the mirror, we only see 10% human. The rest of you, 90% is germs. And somehow we want to find out, well, do those 90% of you, the germs, have a control over your body? And that exploded. And now we're seeing this in the human world, the medicinal world, the environmental world. Did you know that germs will probably be able to stop the global warming problems as long as we actually trust them? I mean, we're getting to a point now where this explosion is going to start going into other areas, and people are going to have to realize that it's not just a matter of having a relationship with germs, like I talked about in my book, but we have to form an alliance with them in order to save ourselves and possibly even our planet. So I would say to people, look at microbiology and try and find a way that you can align that with what you're doing in a completely different field, and I guarantee you're going to find links.
All right, fantastic. Jason, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Hey, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Jason Tetro, author of The Germ Code, published last year. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.